We're looking at one verse, but if you want to take your Bibles and go to Revelation 22, now I've only got 15 minutes, 30 minutes, so I'm going to have to talk even faster than normal. Who was it? Somebody, you told me that you heard me on the radio. Penny says she heard me on the radio, and I talked even faster on there than I do in here. I think they hit the fast forward button a little bit and sped me up just a little bit, because I don't know how I can talk much faster than I already do. Revelation chapter 22. Now, we started last week talking about what's life going to be like. We're going to the new heavens. We're going to this new earth. We're going to spend ages of eternity there. So what's it going to be like? Is it somewhere we want to be? We answered really the first question last week, but we need to read the text and then go back to the question. So Revelation 22, verse 3 says this. Talking about the new heavens and the new earth, there shall be no more curse, but the throne of God and of the Lamb shall be in it, and his servants shall serve him. Now, there are three ideas really separated by commas in this text. The first, there's going to be no more curse. The second is the throne of God and of the Lamb will be in it. And then the last is his servants shall serve him. In God's new world, he says there's no more curse. In God's new world, God is going to govern, and in God's new world, his people are going to serve him. So we broke that down into three distinct groups: a new place, a new politic, and new people. Or we could say it a new garden. What was the other one I wrote down? A new garden and a new goal and a new government. We talked last week about the new garden. I want to finish up where we left off last week. We talked about the curse, how the curse would be broken, how God would deliver us from the curse, and what the new creation would be like when God literally restores Eden. We're going back to Eden in essence, but it's going to be Eden without borders. I didn't get to finish this last week, but I want to hit it real quick. How does all that work? How is all that going to happen? What makes it possible? Let me just start by saying no fairy tale is complete without a hero at the end of the story that breaks the curse. There's got to be the kiss. There's got to be something that breaks the magic spell. You've got to ask the question, if we're under a curse right now, who breaks the curse? Who breaks the spell? And the obvious answer is Jesus, but what's interesting about Jesus is he didn't break the curse with a kiss, he broke the curse with a cross. He broke the curse. Remember, the curse was God cursed the ground for Adam's sake, for Adam's race. In some sense, God cursed the ground in Adam's place. Jesus broke the curse by becoming the curse. I could put it this way: he got us out from under the curse by going into the curse. Just as the ground bore the curse in Adam's place, so Jesus bore the curse for Adam's race. Let me explain what I mean. In Galatians chapter 3, Paul wrote this. Galatians 3:13. Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law, having become a curse for us, for it is written, cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree. Anyone who was hung on a tree was considered cursed by the Jewish people. At Calvary, Jesus bore the curse of sin, and in bearing the curse, he broke the curse. When I say he bore the curse, I mean that in both a figurative and a literal sense. Think about this. Let's think about the figurative first. On the cross, Jesus experienced the full wrath of God against sin. Remember, God cursed the ground instead of cursing Adam. On the cross, God cursed Christ rather than cursing me and you. Just like the ground was cursed in Adam's stead, so Jesus was cursed in our stead. He experienced God's curse against sin, just as the ground suffered for Adam, and in Adam's stead, so Christ suffered for us and in our stead. In a literal sense, that's the figurative sense, but in a literal sense, Jesus bore the curse. And what I mean by that is when Jesus hung on the cross, he bore the curse by wearing the curse. Remember, when Jesus was hung on the cross, they took a crown of what? Thorns. And these weren't just little briars we have around here. These were 2 or 3 inch Middle Eastern thorns. They put those thorns, a crown of that, on his head, and they beat it down into his skull with reeds. Jesus literally wore the symbol of the curse on his own head on the cross. Literally, Jesus became the curse for us in being crucified, but he wore the curse. The thorns Jesus wore were much more than just a tool of Roman mockery. They served as a symbol for all Adam's children. Everybody could look at the cross and see those thorns on his brow and be reminded of what happened in Eden. It was a visual. It was a picture. The curse lost its power when Christ paid sin's penalty in full. Our Redeemer wore the thorns so that we might be free to experience eternity without them. So the thorns came because we disobeyed. Thorns are our fault. But Jesus bore the burden of the thorns in our place. Jesus wore them in our place. Literally, Jesus wore the thorns so we could experience eternity without them. Our Redeemer wore the thorns so we that might be free. He took the worst of God's wrath so we might experience the best of God's grace. Now, let me just close that section before we move into the other section. Say this. So, weeds, thorns, it's all a result of the curse. Right? Jesus broke the curse by wearing the curse. He was cursed in our place. The day before my dad died, I went in the room with him and I talked to him, and Dad was a major gardener. That was Dad's thing. In fact, his spray on his casket was full of squash and tomatoes, and because that's who he was. That's what he was known for. The day before he died, I went in his room and we were talking, and the last thing I said to him before he was unconscious, I said, I look forward to growing a garden with you in a land where the weeds don't grow. But I wasn't just talking about, because then I preached at his funeral, the sermon I preached at his funeral was the land where the weeds don't grow. And I took it not just that yes, in that land there's going to be no more weeds in the ground, but there's even something better than that, and that's that there's going to be no more weeds in us. We are called to bear fruit, aren't we? But the weeds of our lives, our sin, our sinful habits, our personalities, it chokes out the fruit. Do you realize in this land to come, not only is it going to be that the fruit's not going to be choked out by literal weeds, but even the weeds in us are going to be grown. I thought it so much. My dad was a good man, but he wasn't a perfect man. He had some things that he could have grown in, he could have changed. I'm looking for eternity with my dad because in that world, me or him, neither one are going to have weeds in our garden. And both of us are going to be able to express to the other what we really maybe couldn't fully in this world. The fruit was choked out by the weeds in this world, but in that world, the weeds will be gone. So the new garden we're looking for is a garden where there's no weeds on the ground, but there's no weeds in us either. And we thank Jesus that he broke the curse by bearing it. Now we got to move on, though. So we talked last week about a new place or a new garden. This week we're going to talk about a return of the goal. We're going to talk about a new people. Now, if we're to understand our function on the new earth, we have to understand our intended function on the old earth. We were made, or while we were made, answers the question what we will do. Again, the text we read, Revelation 22:3, there'll be no more curse, the throne of God and the Lamb will be in it. And then it says this is what his servants are going to do for eternity. His servants shall serve him. That's so important. So when it tells us that we're going to serve him for eternity, what does that mean? Eternity seems like a relatively long time to be a slave. So when it says that we're going to serve God for eternity, what is God trying to drive at us? Well, let me tell you two things he's not saying before I tell you what he is saying. First, in the Old Testament, serving God was often related to sacrifice. The priest made sacrifice in service to God. Whether it was by a priest or by the people, service meant blood sacrifice. But this is not what God's talking about. It's not talking about that we're going to be making sacrifices for eternity because Jesus already made the final sacrifice. There's no more sacrifice required, Hebrews tells us. So if we're a kingdom of priests, as the Bible tells us, to our God, does that mean we're going to spend eternity making blood sacrifices to Jesus? No, because the sacrifice has already been made. A second thing it doesn't mean is in the New Testament, serving God is often associated with carrying out the Great Commission. Remember, take the gospel to the ends of the earth. We've been commanded to go into all the world and preach the gospel, but that's not what he's talking about in serving him in the new world, because we know that by that time, everyone that will believe will have heard. There'll be no more unbelieving people on this earth. The whole earth will know that there's a God in Israel. After all, he's literally going to be sitting in Israel, in Jerusalem, on the mercy seat. So when we say we're going to serve him for eternity, we don't mean in some sacrificial way. We don't mean spreading the gospel. So what do we mean when we say we're going to serve God for eternity? Let me just put it this way. We are going to serve him through our very living. Just our existence will be an act of service to him. Now let me start to unpack this. We will live in the new heavens, the new earth. In that garden, we will achieve the goal he created us for in the first garden. We will live there the way God intended us to live here. To grasp what that looks like, it's imperative that we go back to the garden. What better place to understand God's intentions than to go back to the garden where he first laid it out? In Genesis, in the early parts of Genesis, God gave Adam and Eve two commands. I know you might not get the words exactly right, but can you tell me what the two commands that God gave Adam and Eve were? Somebody. Nobody. Okay, the two commands that God gave Adam and Eve, you know it, you're just not wanting to say it, was basically to conceive and to conquer. Conceive and conquer was what he gave them. So you're to replenish the earth, or you're to fill the earth up with your descendants, conceive. And then he said that you're to take dominion of the earth, so you're to conquer the earth, basically. If that was God's original plan, if the two things that God told people to do originally was to conceive and to conquer, then it would make sense that that would be what we would do in the next world. Now let me say something about conceiving first, though. When we talk about the world to come, when we talk about the new heavens and new earth, Jesus makes it clear that nobody's going to be married there. The Bible says that they're not married or given in marriage, but they're like the angels. So when we know that Jesus told us that, then that tells us that conceiving is not going to be part of what goes on the new earth. But it makes me have to address something there. The desire to experience physical and emotional intimacy is natural and right. So why would it be that God will not have marriage in his new kingdom? Now, some of you are excited that God ain't going to have marriage in his new kingdom. You're ready to be done with it already. But then others are disappointed, and others can't understand, how can we spend eternity in the new world without there being marriage or without there being sexual intimacy? I mean, that's such a big part of life here. Let me press the issue further and ask the question that many people are thinking, but they're way too spiritual to ever ask this, okay? How can heaven be heaven? Now, please forgive me, but I got to say this. How can heaven be heaven without sex? Okay, so can heaven really be a pleasant place if it is an eternal fast from our natural desires? Even the word intimacy has been hijacked in our hypersexualized culture. When we think about intimacy and the question I just asked you, the answer found to that question is recognizing we've asked the wrong question to begin with. Now let me explain. Heaven will not be a fast from our natural desires. It will be our natural desires' ultimate fulfillment. Every good desire present in us will be replaced by the thing that it was meant to represent, if it was meant to represent something else. God ordained marriage for both pleasure and procreation. Still, the fuller role of marriage, according to the Scripture, is what? It's to illustrate the union between Christ and his church. Okay? Even the word intimacy has been hijacked in our hypersexualized culture. So many people, even Christian people, cannot imagine an eternity without the physical act of intimacy. But what we're failing to understand is that intimacy, that union, sex is only a shadow of the better, fuller intimacy that is meant to be had between God and his people, between Christ and his bride. Until we understand that marriage to Christ and intimacy to God, with God, is better, we're not talking about something physical. We're talking about something spiritual, something fulfilling. Intimacy with God is better than the earthly invention that was given to us to point to intimacy. We will never appreciate the absence of what we know and what we love until we understand what God is offering us is something better. So some people say, well, if there's no procreation, if there's no marriage in that world, how can that world really be a delight? Because marriage is really meant ultimately to point to one thing, and that is union with Christ. The reason marriage will be done away with in that world is because the best of it will be finally realized in our relationship with Jesus Christ. If I can just make it real simple, what I'm trying to say is the best days of your marriage, the most joyous moments of your marriage, won't compare to just a tiny drop of the joy you'll have just in friendship with Jesus. In eternity, you'll never think about, well, I wish I was married. Because having Christ himself will replace that, will be so much better than that. Now, this is the good rather than the bad news. Even the best marriages are not perfect. There are holes in our hearts that no other person can fill. But what we're instructed is that in eternity, Jesus will fill those holes that even our husband or our wife never could. Often when I'm counseling young people that are getting married, one of the first things I tell them is, look, he's a sinner and you're a sinner. When you get two sinners together, what do you have? Two sinners. You're not going to complete each other. You're not going to fix all each other's problems. In fact, what you're going to do when you get married is make each other's problems greater. Because now you've got two selfish people instead of just one selfish people you have to worry about. What marriage, and this is a whole different message, but I think one of the things that God does in marriage, one of the chief aims of marriage, is it shows us how selfish we are, how much we want our own way, and how much we need to change. But see, that won't be necessary in that world. We will have been ultimately changed. We will be remade like Christ, both spiritually and physically, so that goal will be done away with. Our union will be a union with Him, and we'll not be looking to someone. You know, these young people get married and they think, man, this is going to fix all my problems, and a year down the road, they got more problems than they had when they started because their expectations were in the wrong place. Another human can't feel that for you. In eternity, though, Jesus is going to feel all those things. So I'll say to you, some of you, maybe who your marriages didn't work out right, or maybe you've struggled through your marriage and you feel like maybe I made the wrong choice. Let me just tell you something. Your fairy tale has not passed by. You just haven't seen Prince Charming yet. And if you're sitting with your husband, don't poke him right now. That is not now's not the time. Literally, our Prince Charming is coming riding on a white horse. Okay, so those who honor God by patiently and respectfully committing themselves to even a loveless spouse in this world, they remind themselves they are waiting for a wedding to come where the institution itself is going to be restored and realized in its fuller way, and that is going to be an eternal marriage. I'm not talking about something physical, I'm talking about something spiritual to Christ. So, the wedding we're really waiting for is the marriage of the Lamb. Okay? Now, having said all that, so we're not talking about the two commands that God gave them in Eden. One was to reproduce, one was to procreate. We're not talking about that. But we are still talking about the other command He gave them. The first was to conquer. The second command He gave, or the first command He gave them was to conceive. The second command He gave them was to conquer. Though the command to reproduce will be abolished, the command to subdue the creation, not only will it not be abolished, it never has been abolished. Our role is to bring this creation that God has given us under our dominion. By dominion, that means we are learning its uses. Now, we have to realize that when we're told to subdue it, to bring it under dominion, subdue and exploit are not the same things. When God told Adam to take dominion, He did not tell him to take advantage of the creation. To subdue the creation is to rule over the creation, not to abuse it. So in this new world, if we're going to have a new garden, what's going to be our new goal? Our new goal, the new people are going to rule in this new place over this new garden. Our goal is going to be go back to Eden, the original tent that God had for this earth, and that's for us to take it into control and to discover His glory through it. Man's God-given assignment is to steward creation. We steward the creation not only by managing the property, but by discovering and developing its practical uses. In that world, we will serve the Creator by managing His property. Now let's unpack some of what that means. Just as the earth bursts open with new life after winter melts away, so humanity will experience the rise of an unbroken, unfaded, unending spring when Jesus establishes this kingdom on earth. We will know the truth, and the truth will set us free. The light will reveal all things in their truest form. It will dispel all the lies that have held us captive. Think about how much more our society would advance if we weren't believing things that weren't true. We're held back by lies. And I don't just mean that in the political realm, I mean in the scientific realm. There's so many things that we've already made assumptions about that aren't true. It holds us back from moving forward because we're held back by things that aren't even true. What about when the light shines in, when the truth Himself takes a throne in Jerusalem? You shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. What about when the truth is on the throne and the truth is setting us free from all the lies of the past? What's that going to look like? Our feeble hearts would rupture with delight if we could conceive the pleasure beyond measure that is awaiting us in the guilt-free, glory-saturated world that God's created. Let's take it the private sector. What could a master builder build with eternity as his deadline and an uncursed creation as his supply line? What could a master builder build with eternity as his deadline and an uncursed creation as his supply line? After the flood, God said there was nothing that man would not be able to accomplish as a united collective force. He said there's nothing man can't do. In the old world, that was dangerous. In the new world, that will be glorious. How mighty will the towers be when they reach not to heaven, but from heaven? Recent advancements in technology would baffle our predecessors. My grandma died when I was 7 years old. So grandma's been dead for 28 years. If grandma came back right now, there would be so much that would have to be explained to her. What this light up pad that everyone's carrying around is. And why is everybody always doing this? And how people can just, with something on their finger, know their blood pressure. I mean, just the things like that. And you think of the advancements in cars. You think about the advancements in society. But let's go back further than that. Let's go back a couple hundred years or 500 years. Try to explain to George Washington just what's our normal life now. The reason I say that is because the recent advancements in technology would baffle our predecessors, but the advanced technology there, I think, will bewilder our posterity. What's especially interesting to me is the thought that the inventor, in that world, the inventor will be able to create without constraint. You know, inventing is a part of subduing the creation. It's taking what God has made and finding out the uses for it. Neither in that world, neither the government nor the self will have to regulate or restrain technology because no one will ever even think about using it for the wrong reason. So there won't have to be any regulations put on anything because there'll be no sinful nature to regulate. The reason the government, I've only got 10 minutes left. The reason the government exists is to punish the evildoer, right? We'll talk about that next, or week after next, when the government has something to do besides punishing the evildoer. The reason the government exists is to punish the evildoer. So if there is no evil in the heart, then there's going to be no reason for the government to regulate what can be invented and how far it can be taken. Some technologies right now, some nuclear technologies are not even explored, they're not even developed in our current state because of how they could be used for evil if they were unleashed. But on the new earth, the fear of evil intentions will be gone and development will be both unhindered financially and physically. They'll never say there's no funding for that. And they'll never say we can't get the parts we need. It would be impossible to calculate the amount of time, energy, and resources, both mental and physical, that we invest in staving off the effects of the curse. You know the billions of dollars a year that goes into research, just us trying to figure out how to make life last just a little bit longer? Let's even take that off the table. Think about the millions of dollars that goes into research on just how to kill all these weeds every year. Okay, what is that? That's the curse, isn't it? Think about all the time and energy that's put into just trying to keep the curse from taking everything over. But get this, on the new earth, the curse will be no more. So what will scientific minds apply themselves to when there's no more curse to combat? Most of our science now goes to trying to combat the curse, doesn't it? When there's no more curse in that world, what are they going to give themselves to? And I don't have the full answer to that, but it's just a wonder to think about. When that's not what they're focused on, what are they going to be focused on? What will they be able to do? Those who enjoyed research here will not somehow lose interest there. The mind that wants to know will still desire to learn, but there it'll be only for the right reasons. Imagine a world where research is given solely to bettering life rather than just sustaining it. Here we seek immunizations. There we'll seek improvements. In this time, we seek to extend life. At that time, we will seek to enhance life. Now we seek cures. There we will give our attention to new causes that we haven't even had time to think about here. Every discovery made in the lab or on land, though, the point of all this is going to be a discovery of the glory of God. Being remade like Him doesn't mean we'll immediately know everything that He knows, but it does mean that we will have eternity to learn all we possibly can. When you just do a little research into how our bodies, the cells, how it's all held together, how it's all glued together, what holds it together, you just step back and you see the glory of God, how there wasn't anything He didn't think about in creation. I mean, down to the most minute detail. So think about for eternity, every discovery we make, and whether you realize it or not, even in this world, every discovery you make is a discovery of the glory of God. Everything you learn is something that God programmed in. So every discovery, every new thing is a discovery of the glory of God. In that world, every day is going to be another, wow, He did that too? He thought of that too? Right now, pseudoscience hinders real science. Misconceptions, misdirections keep us from moving forward. But in that world, the truth will be our tutor. He'll set us free. False doctrines like evolution and misunderstandings that stem from it are all going to be erased from the textbook, so scientific investigation will be funneled into things that actually matter, because we're not going to be trying to prove theories that don't even exist. Some things are not even productive to think about now because we don't have the technology or the materials necessary to build them. Remember, God said of man, before the flood, he can do anything that enters into his mind. I tend to think before the flood, the world was actually more, we think of it being, I don't want to say a caveman type world, but let's just say a caveman type world. But I think before the flood, they might have been actually more advanced than we are. I think they were probably more intelligent than we are now. They lived longer. They lived 800-900 years. And one of them, Adam, had literally walked with God and had learned from God himself. There's a good chance in the 2,000 years up before the flood that man had actually advanced himself way further than we are right now. Because they could do anything God said that they set their mind to. But it was a bad thing because they could set their mind to some bad things. In that world, though, there'll be no setting their mind to the bad thing. What about when God releases the world and releases us to do what we set our mind to, and nobody has to worry that it's going to turn out bad? The reality is we'll develop things on the new earth that we can't even dream about here because right now our biggest minds are still too small. For those of us who love food, think about the delicacies that will be presented on God's table in the New Jerusalem. Now, I said natural desire. Eternity is not going to be separated from natural desire. In fact, the marital relationship is the only thing I see that disappears. The sexual function is the only thing I see that disappears. We're still going to eat. We're still going to do other run and jump and play, other things that we enjoy. So let's think about food for a minute. For those of us who love food, think about the delicacies that will be presented at the marriage supper of the Lamb. But then think about, that's not going to be the final meal. That's going to be the first taste of an eternal culinary delight. The idea that the physical is unspiritual is an idea that can't be found in Scripture. God gave us the ability to taste as a means of grasping and further appreciating His glory. We're literally going to serve God in that world by cooking and eating and enjoying it. We'll taste things on the other side that we often enjoyed here, but I guarantee you when we taste it there, somehow it will be much better. Every ingredient will be available to everyone. Cooking will not just be done to sustain life. Their cooking will be done out of pure enjoyment. Restaurants known for Michelin stars will seem like poorly managed, roast-infested fast food joints when God opens up the cupboard of heaven. Everything we do here will be enjoyable. Everything we do there will be enjoyable because it will be done for Him and with Him. Every meal we enjoy here is an appetizer offering us a little taste of home. So when you have that meal that you enjoy more than anything, next time you bite into it, just remember, that's the appetizer, and it can't compare to the entree that's coming in the new world. Imagine a world where people are actually encouraged to think, where they're encouraged to dream, write, play, build, explore without limitation or restraint. I think in that world, Michelangelo, if he was a Christian, I don't know, but if Michelangelo was a Christian, he'll finally be able to paint that masterpiece he always knew he had hidden deep in his heart. As I'm not an artist or anything, but I do like to write, and when I'm writing, there's always that struggle. There's something I want to say, and I want to say it in the most colorful, most beautiful way, but I can't exactly find that word. I can imagine Michelangelo painting, and he can't find that exact shade or that exact color. He'll have eternity to figure it out there. The symphonies played in the New Earth's grand halls will make Beethoven's finest work seem like the tinkering of a child on a nursery piano. The tales that the tellers will tell when they have time to daydream. You imagine the movies you enjoy. Somebody had to think that whole plot line up. What about when somebody has 100 years to think up the plot line? And all the details. The architect's going to have no creative roof. The sky will be his limit. Paris will seem ordinary. In this new world we're looking for, it's going to be like nothing we can think of, yet at the same time it's going to be like everything we have. I look forward to the literature of the new world. I enjoy writing, but I find it challenging to locate specific words. I sometimes spend hours figuring out how to express a single thought clearly and colorfully. On the new earth, though, I'll have the vocabulary, the dexterity I always wanted but never had. Before death, Jonathan Edwards, who is probably the greatest American theologian, the greatest theologian America has produced, Jonathan wanted to write a massive theological work entitled The History of Redemption. He wanted to trace God's work from beginning to end. What better place, with what better resources could he find to write such a work than in the eternal city of God, with God as his counselor? Think about Jonathan Edwards writing that book he wanted to write, The History of Redemption, with God as the editor. I look forward to finally reading an unbiased history of the world. Just the facts, nothing more. I can't wait to see the masterpiece of history from the top side, finally understand what on earth God was doing. I assure you in that world, we will not care less about what happened in this world. We'll care more because history will be the written record of God's amazing grace. What I'm trying to paint for you is a picture of a world where every day, every night's a party, but you don't wake up the next morning feeling at all guilty. Every day is as enjoyable or more enjoyable than the next. How often have you said this? In a perfect world. Well, in a perfect world, I just want to tell you, the perfect world is on its way. Scientists are only beginning to uncover the potential possibilities of infrared therapy. And I close with this. If terrestrial light is so effective in this cursed cosmos, can there be a conceivable limit to what light will do? They're saying, that light has the potential to be able to cure cancer if it's figured out how to use it just right. If terrestrial light is that effective in this cursed world, can there be any conceivable limits to what the light will do when the darkness no longer challenges it? You could say our future is bright because of the light. In the land of the light, all our hurts will be healed. The deep, seemingly irreversible scar tissue left by the disappointments in life will be wiped away like a child's warm breath from a backseat car window. Broken hearts will be mended. Minds crippled by anxiety and illness will be made well. Bodies broken by the effects of age and disease will dance again. No one will ever be burnt by the sun in that city, but everyone will be healed by his presence. What I'm trying to get you to see is this world to come is not going to be somehow divorced from this world. We're going to live in that world the way we were intended to live without the curse. It's going to be Eden without borders. There's a certain sadness that accompanies reaching the end of a good novel. You kind of wish it would go on a little longer. The way some of you feel about all my sermons. You just wish it would go on just a little bit longer. We always wish the writer would have written just a little more. However, in that world, let me just say this. The page will never be turned on the last page of heaven's story because the end's never going to be written. You're not, you think, well, man, isn't that going to get boring? No, because every day will be better than the day before. Life with the light will be life in the light. There, light will have no limits, and I think neither will we. So that's just a brief picture. When it says we're going to serve him, what does it mean when it says we're going to serve him? It means we're going to live life by bringing this creation into subjection like he originally intended us to, and spending every day discovering just a little bit more about the glory and the goodness of God to the point that we'll just be overwhelmed and amazed constantly at just how good he is and just what he's done. I'll stop. We'll pray tonight. We'll pick up next time. This will be the end of our study on heaven next time we gather, and we're going to talk about the government in that new world. What will the government be like in the eternal city of God? Father, I pray that you'll again, keep our eyes on the prize. Help us to look forward. Help us to long, to wait for the day of your coming, to believe, to believe. And Lord, knowing that we're going to serve you there, help us to be faithful in serving you here. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Just before you leave, there were a total of 60